Good morning, and welcome to another episode of the Clarion Call. When I did my tribute to Brian Wilson last week, I mentioned the album that he did with Dyke Parks in 1995 called Orange Crate Art. It really was a great album, but it was an album that, as Dyke Parks said, took a lot of work and effort and then dropped like a stone. Never really had any sales, never really had any critical appreciation, but it's a masterwork of vocal arrangements by Brian and singing by Brian. And Dyke Parks, of course, wrote all the music, produced the music, and wrote all the lyrics. But he left the vocals and the vocal arrangements to Brian, and that's where the album really shines, because Brian was a genius at multi-part harmonies, as you will hear. Now, I could have picked any number of songs from this album, but I picked one called My Jeanine. They're all great, so there's really no picking. The album is based upon California history for the most part, although this song could be from anywhere, I suppose, where apples are grown. In any case, let's listen to a little bit of this and see what you think.
I carried a torch for her in the orchard. Apples were her last name. My Jeanine.
Wow. I did notice a typo there. I'm sure when he said my Jeanine in jeans, he didn't mean Gene. He meant Jean. I put the captions on, so that's my bad. I wanted you to be able to read the words because Dyke Parks was a genius at writing lyrics. He had started with the Beach Boys way back during the Smile era, and he wrote the lyrics to one of their hit songs, Heroes and Villains, which Mike Love famously said to Dyke Parks, "What does it mean?" And Dyke Parks said, "Nothing." That was a big conflict between Mike Love of the Beach Boys and Dyke Parks. Mike couldn't quite grasp the esoteric nature of Dyke Parks' work. But when Dyke approached Brian in the early 1990s to work on this album, Brian was still coming out of his multi-decade mental issues. And when Dyke went to his house to ask him to work on it, he found Brian sitting alone, staring at a turned-off television. And he wasn't in very good shape, but Dyke convinced him to try it. And Brian said, "Well, why do you want me?" And Dyke Parks said, "Well, because I can't stand the sound of my own voice," which was good enough for Brian. And I believe Brian may be singing all the parts here, the lead vocals and all the harmony parts. I'm not sure. But whatever it is, you can see the trademark harmonies that he made so famous with the Beach Boys are still great.
We would meander now hand in hand in our Appalachian climb. My Jeanine, my Jeanine. We bring in the spring and toss from the swing along apple blossom time. My Jeanine. My Jeanine.
And Brian had absolutely nothing to do with writing that music, although it does sound so much like the Beach Boys that almost could have been written. Dyke Parks is one of the insiders of music who never achieved any great fame of his own, but was behind the scenes on many great groups, including the Beach Boys, wrote many of their great songs. Little Feat he worked with very closely, and a number of other stars that you've probably heard of. But you probably never heard too much about Dyke Parks. Now, I bought his very first album when he got disillusioned and left the Beach Boys over the Smile fiasco. He came out with an album called Song Cycle, which was brilliant, but again, too highbrow, I guess, for the rock and roll audience. It was very positively reviewed at the time, and that's why I bought it. And I do enjoy the album, but he even got better, I think, as he went along. His next two albums were calypso music. He spent a lot of time working in the Caribbean and with steel drums, and I think those two albums are absolutely brilliant. But the funny thing is, he practically disowned those two albums. He said they were terrible and he wished he'd never done them. I don't agree at all. I think they're great. And then he had a number of other good albums later on. But then he kind of turned more towards doing music for television and movies, and a lot of movies that you probably have heard. And then again in 1995, he got back with Brian. And wow, can you hear what's going on with those vocals? I mean, it's just amazing. If those are all his voices, what a brilliant, brilliant guy. Let's hear the rest of it.
Remember when life was North Carolina? 2 bits for cokes and jokes at the diner. Time was a magazine. My Jeanine. My Jeanine. My Jeanine. My Jeanine.
What a way to end it with that vocal flourish there. I certainly hope that now that Brian has passed and people are taking more of an interest in his entire career, that this album will be rediscovered. They did issue a 25-year anniversary version in 2020, which I do not have. I only became aware of it when I was researching this video. So I may have to check that out, because apparently there's some bonus features on there that are probably pretty interesting. Isn't that just a brilliant vocal performance there? There's so much going on with it. You know, this is why they call him the Mozart of rock, because he was just so far ahead of anybody else out there in the rock field as far as arranging those harmonies. It's interesting, you know, now that Brian has passed, how many tributes he's receiving from, you know, the giants of the rock era. I saw a video last night where Paul McCartney and the other Beatles have always praised him to the guys, but there was one with Jackson Browne and Elvis Costello and many, many other artists. In fact, one review I read said that Brian Wilson was your favorite musician's favorite musician. And I think that's pretty much true. He was one of the giants of 20th century rock and went into the 21st century a little bit with a couple albums that are also very good near the end of his life. I had been wanting to do a reaction to an Orange Crate Art song for a very long time, and I'm sorry I never got to do it during Brian's life, but glad to finally get to it now. And again, what a wonderful, wonderful talent, and his work will live on forever. Thank you, Brian.